The earlier exercise showed you how to use the HTTP service to retrieve data from the server. What happens if your server is down? What happens if you're unable to connect to the server? What will the HTTP service do? What will the call to the HTTP service result in those circumstances? Now, if a call cannot be completed, then you'll get back error code from there. Now, in this case, if you still continue to work as usual, then your web page may not render correctly. To show you an example, I have shut down the server completely, and then let's try and see how our application works with the server not working. So now, taking a look at our web application, when the server is down, you notice that there is a blank space there. Nothing is being shown. This is not a good user experience. Similarly, when you go to our menu page, it's completely blank. Nothing is shown there, which is not a good experience either. And of course, the dish details are not being shown. Now, what happens if your server is unable to return the data? Or what happens if you try to access the server and then the resource is not found on the server? How do we handle these situations? As we learned with HTTP, we realized that the server will return values if it so happens that the server contains the resource that you're asking for. If the resource is missing or if the resource has been moved, the server returns other codes in the status code that is returned from the server. So we can use that to handle situations where we are unable to retrieve the correct data. So let's go and look at how we can fix up our controller and also our web pages so that the appropriate error message is indicated on the screen. Let's first deal with the situation where the server is unable to return any value for the menu. Now, if that is the case, then what we may want to do is to set up our web page to show a message to indicate that the result is not yet ready. Also, we may wish to set up our web page to indicate some sort of loading information while you're retrieving the data from the server. As we realized, retrieving data from the server may take some time. So in order to set up our web page to reflect the situation more realistically, what I'm going to do is to introduce a Boolean variable here and a message here. Let me show you the detailed construction for the menu controller. We'll repeat the same thing with the dish detail controller and also the index controller. So for the menu controller, what I'm going to do is to introduce a show menu Boolean variable, which is set to false by default, and then a message variable, which is set to loading at this moment. And we realize that if the menu factory get dishes method does not succeed, now we saw that we have the success function being defined here. We can also add a function, callback function, that will be called if an error is encountered. So the then part takes two functions as parameters. So let me add in the function corresponding to the situation where the error occurs when trying to retrieve data from the server side. So after introducing the error handling function here, let's take a look at the code. So this first function will be called when the request is successful and the response is returned correctly. So in this case, I'm going to put the dishes equal to the response data, and then I will also set the show menu to true, meaning that the menu is now ready to be shown. If there is an error, then I will set the message string to error, and then I will retrieve the status code and the status text from the response and then create an error message displaying the status. Now, how do I make use of this in the code? So let's switch to menu.html and then see how we can show this information in menu.html. Switching to menu.html, what we realize is that this div class is the one that encloses the display of the menu. I want to be able to show this menu only when the menu is ready. If it is not, then I want to show a message to the user. To help me do that, I will introduce another div into this row as follows. Let me introduce the code and then we'll come back and examine what this code does. I have now updated the menu.html page with an additional div here. Now for this div, what I am doing is I am using the ngIf directive and then setting the ngIf directive to not show menu, meaning that if show menu is false, this div is going to be shown. The ngIf directive we have discussed already in the lecture earlier. So we saw that the ngIf directive, when set to true, will cause this particular element to be added into the DOM. If the ngIf, if it evaluates to false, then this whole element will be removed from the DOM completely. Now the same thing, I have also used the ngIf directive with the other div class which actually displays the menu. So here I am specifying the ngIf as show menu, meaning that if show menu is true, then the menu will be shown. If not, then this element, this div class, will be completely removed from the DOM. So using this ngIf, I am able to either show the message when the menu is not ready, but when the menu is ready, that div containing that message will be removed from the DOM, and instead this other div that actually displays the message will be added into the DOM because of the use of the two ngIf directives here. So with this little switch, I am able to show error messages or loading message to the user when the menu is not ready. But when the menu has been retrieved and is ready to be displayed to the user, then I will switch and then show the div that displays the menu to the user. Now all this is controlled using the ngIf directive here. I can use the same approach for the dish details as well as showing the dish item in the index page. So let me go ahead and make those changes both to the dish details controller and the index controller, and also to the dishDetail.html page and the index.html page. I will just quickly show you the changes that I have made without going into the details of what I have changed, but from looking at this explanation, you can easily interpret what those changes mean for those two cases. Switching to the dish detail controller, you can see that now I have introduced a show dish Boolean variable which set to false and the message here, and then I am using the same construct that I used for the menu there. Within the then, I am saying that if the response is correctly retrieved, then I will set show dish to true. If not, I will leave it as false, and then if the response is indicating that there is an error, then I set the message to the appropriate error result here. Same thing within the index controller. I have used the show dish to false and message loading, and then also updated this then method to take two functions as parameters, both for the success and the error situations here. Again, the same way that I have done for the dish detail controller. Switching to dish-detail.html page, you can now see that I have introduced a div here controlled by this ngIf directive with the not show dish here, which will display the message if the dish information is not ready. And then the other div that I already had there, I have updated it with in the ngIf is equal to show dish, meaning that the details will be displayed if show dish is true. Switching to the home.html page, you can now see that I am repeating a similar pattern here. Now, since it so happens that the item is displayed using a media object here, I am using a simple div here with the value set to ngIf not equal to show dish here. And then the message here for the media class, I am adding the ngIf is equal to show dish here. So with this changes, now my web page, in case it is unable to retrieve the data from the server, will display something a bit more meaningful, or at least indicate an error condition on the application. Now, when my application is running correctly, or rather when my server is running correctly, everything displays as normal, as you would expect. So the menu items all are displayed normally. Let me introduce a couple of mistakes into the code to show you where problems can be appropriately identified. I am now going into services.js file, and instead of saying dishes, I will simply make a mistake there and say dishes, and then save. And then let's go back and take a look at our application and see what it displays. So going back to our web application, you now see that there is a bit more meaningful message here saying error 404 not found, because obviously there is no resource on the server side with the name dishes. So that's why it is indicating that I can't find that on the server. Similarly, when you go to the menu items, everything is fine. But if I click on any one of the menu items, note that I am displaying error 404 not found. So this is a bit more meaningful message than trying to not have access. I went back and corrected the error in the services.js file. So now everything is displaying normally. So that is one way of handling errors when you're trying to retrieve data from the server and you encounter problems retrieving the data. This completes our short exercise where we indicate how to handle errors while trying to do client-server communication using the HTTP service.